To this Wallace Stegner Center Green Bag event, which happens to be our final Green Bag event for this semester. We will start again in the fall. Before I mention that, though, I'm Bob Kiter. I know most, but not all of you in the audience. I've had the privilege of directing the Wallace Stegner Center since its inception about 25 years ago, much to my amazement. On behalf of both the Stegner Center and the College of Law, let me welcome you to today's Green Bag event. And let me thank, I know many of you have been here for a number of events throughout the year, and we're grateful to your interest in the programs that we put on, and encourage you to continue to join us as we put on our programming for next academic year. And on that score, the calendar of events for the Stegner Center 2018-19 year will be posted on our website in August. That said, we've already done some planning for next year, and on September 26th, we have the former director of the National Park Service, John Jarvis, here, who will be talking about his new book, The Future of Conservation in America, A Chart for Rough Waters. That is, I think it's about to come out from the University of Chicago Press. And on November 9th, the Stegner Center is hosting a conference on PURPA at 40. That probably doesn't mean much except to those versed in energy policy. That's the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. This will be its 40th year anniversary, and we will have experienced practitioners and others who have worked with this important legislation that also addresses alternative energy sources here for an all-day conference on November 9th. There's a sign-up sheet going around. If you're not on our list receiving emails of events, etc., please sign up, and even if you are, let us know you're here. With that said, let me introduce our speaker today, Andrew Gruber, who's the Executive Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. His topic today is Wasatch Choice 2050 Regional Vision. And I know that a number of you have worked with him and are familiar with the topic today. So let me just give you a little background on Andrew. He himself grew up in New York City. He attended the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and then he and I share Northwestern University School of Law in Chicago as our alma maters. He previously practiced law in the private law firm setting in Chicago, and then served as the Senior Deputy Executive Director for Legal and Governmental Affairs for the Regional Transportation Authority in Chicago. As the Executive Director here for the Wasatch Front Regional Council, it's that council that provides a forum for collaboration among cities, counties, UDOT, the Utah and other public entities here, and community stakeholders. It develops a regional vision for growth and development along the Wasatch Front, and is engaged in long-range regional transportation planning as part of Utah's Unified Transportation Planning, and also, I gather, has some funding authority, which makes you even more important with that entity. With that, please welcome Andrew Gruber.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. All right, can you hear me? Is my microphone on? Yes, you can hear me all right? Okay. I don't like to be constrained by a podium. So I am really, really happy to be here. First of all, happy to be here at the U. I've had an affinity for the U ever since I moved here in 2010. As was noted, I grew up in New York City, and then I lived and worked in Chicago for 20-some years before finally coming to my senses and moving out here to the west. And the U is an incredible institution. I now have sort of an official tie because my son is a freshman at the U. He said he was going to be here today, but like many students, he's in preparation for finals, so he doesn't support his dad enough to show up here. Although I will tell you, he said, "Hey, Dad, so you're going to be up there after your lecture, which I can't come to. Can you swing by and pick me up and then drop me off somewhere else?" And I was like, "No, I cannot. If you can't come to my lecture, I'm not going to drive you around and be your chauffeur." I also am really happy to be here at the law school and with the Stegner Center. I am an attorney by training. I am a recovering attorney. I like to say I have moved my way gradually out of the practice of law over the last several years. I think I'm in step 7 or 8 of a 12-step program to get over that particular affliction. But for those of you that are in law school right now, can I ask that question? Raise your hand if you're a current law student. Okay, it's like, don't worry. I'm not like trying to talk you like you made the wrong decision. Being a lawyer is a really, really great thing, and it does open up all sorts of possibilities to do wonderful things. I'm just glad I'm not a practicing attorney anymore at this point. Okay, that was the law students. If you're a lawyer or a law student, raise your hand. Okay, so now we know how to separate people when necessary, right? When the ship goes down, you know who to throw overboard first. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about the future of our region, just that small topic, right? We here on the Wasatch Front and in Utah, we're among the fastest growing states in the country. And that really presents some serious challenges for us going forward and opportunities. And so I'm basically going to talk about 3 things. And as I go through this, I'm going to ask you all to think about these things. What are the impacts of that growth that we're experiencing? And what does the future look like for us 5, 10, 30 years into the future? For us, for our kids, our grandkids. And then what I want to talk about, sort of the core of why I'm here, is to talk about this Wasatch Choice 2050 regional vision, which is essentially a plan, a strategy, a vision for how we can make sure that in the future in this region, we have really high quality of life. And then finally, I want to conclude with talking a little bit about our role and how we can work together, okay? To make sure that we have a bright future going forward. Okay, so before jumping into the vision, why do we live here? Wait, one more question for you all. How many of you are Utah natives? Raise your hand if you're a Utah native. Okay, and if you moved here from somewhere else like I did, most of you, right? Most of us. Well, there's a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons that people move here, like I did, okay, hold on. See. Tech support. Thank you very much. Let's see. Is because of the unparalleled natural beauty that we have here, right? The windows are closed, but as you know, unlike just about any other real city in the United States, we have incredible, unparalleled access to the outdoors, right? The mountains right there behind our city, behind your university. And if you're willing to go a little further, you can get out to places like this. Anybody know where this is? Canyonlands. So that's me and a group of my friends in the middle of riding the White Rim in Canyonlands. It's incredible. What a place to live, right? Also, we have a really strong economy. One of the strongest economies, lowest unemployment rates of any state in the nation. You know, Silicon Slopes is an example of the thriving tech industry that we have here. Goldman Sachs, the finance giant, they have their second largest office of anywhere in the country other than New York City, right here in Utah. And it's the most requested transfer locations of all of Goldman Sachs offices in the world, people want to come here. And so that demand, that, people moving in like so many of us did, and by the way, we have the highest birth rate of any state in the country, right? We are really exceptional at producing offspring here in Utah. And so our population growth, you see it looking back to 1980 and then looking ahead to 2050, we're going to reach 5 million people by about 2050. We just crested 3 million. So you think about the impacts of that population growth. 2 million more people living here, working here, driving around, producing emissions out of their vehicles and their homes, right? You think about the impacts of that on our future. Well, so here's our incredibly beautiful state that we have, the mountains, the deserts, but where do most of those people live? 3 million people now? Well, most of them are right here on the Wasatch Front. And you know that Wasatch Front is a long linear corridor. We have a unique geography. So you get people packed in between the mountains that we love so much and that provide our water, and on the other side, the lakes and the mountains. And so you look at Salt Lake County, it's a bowl. So what does that mean? Well, as our great friends in our air quality organizations like Breathe Utah and others can tell us, it traps emissions. And it means that with that great population growth we have coming, there's much less room to just spread out, like if we were Phoenix and you can sort of endlessly go into the desert. So that creates some real challenges, our geography does. And I want to spend a minute on some of these challenges that we're facing before looking ahead to the vision that I'm going to talk with you about. So one of those, I'll just tick through a few here. How much time do we spend traveling around, getting to and from places? Now, this may be different if you live right here at the university and you're very close to where either your job is or your classes are. But right now, today, the average resident of the Wasatch Front spends just shy of an hour commuting, okay? So to and from work or to school. As we project this out, as we model this out into the future to 2050, that's projected, if we stay on our current path right now, to grow to about an hour and 41 minutes of just additional time. That's time you just spend getting around. And what does that look like? Well, let me show you a picture, an actual picture of the 405 freeway outside of Los Angeles. Okay? We've got our population growth coming, 2 million more people. Does this seem like a good strategy? Just like, let's just make I-15 20 lanes, 25 lanes. Is that anybody voting for that strategy? Okay, no hands are going up. Traffic jams can be really problematic. Let me show you a picture of another traffic jam that I took. This is a bison jam that I took in Yellowstone from a snow coach. Now maybe, some traffic jams are okay. Like that was fun to be in, okay? I promise I'm not going to show you all of my family photos. I think that's the last one. Okay, so what are the implications of that? Other than just the problems with getting around, there are more serious implications, and one of them is how many important destinations, how many opportunities can people access within a reasonable amount of time? It's a metric that we refer to as access to opportunity. So today on the Wasatch Front, the average person, averaging across the whole region, can get to 458,000 jobs within a 30-minute commute one way, okay? That's pretty good. That's a pretty good number given the size of our region. That's part of why our unemployment rate is relatively low. That's part of why our economic upward mobility is pretty high. But as we project out ahead to the future, if we stay on our current path, that number goes down to 290,000. And so think about the implications of that for our economy, for the ability of young people to find jobs, to stay here. So that's a problem as we look ahead. Another issue is we're getting more crowded, just more people, right? So this is a photo from Arches National Park. Many of you have probably been here, right? The visitation in Utah's national parks are incredible, iconic national parks. Over the last 10 years has doubled. And it's not just our national parks right here on the Wasatch Front. It's in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, the demand is so high. The use is so high. And it's not just winter, it's summer also, right? We're feeling this, we're experiencing it. Another challenge is things are getting more expensive, particularly housing. Now let me explain to you what's going on in this chart. This is showing by decade 2 pieces of information. The gray bars are households, like the number of family units, okay? And then the housing units is actually the number of homes, houses, apartments, condos, townhomes, whatever it may be. And what you can see as you look back over time is that the number of new housing units that are built is greater than the number of new households, right? So we were providing enough homes for people to live in. In the last several years, for the first time in decades, that's flipped. So now what we've got is there are more households being created than there are homes available for people. And so basic economics, supply and demand, when the demand exceeds the supply, the price goes up, right? The price for housing in Utah is going up by about 7 to 8% a year, which obviously exceeds the general rate of income growth, which is more in the range of 2 to 3% a year. So housing is getting less and less affordable as time goes on. And this is a graph from a study that just was released from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute, right here at the University of Utah within the business school. They're doing incredible policy work. And what this is showing, let's see if this pointer works. Let's see. What this is showing, this red bar right here is Utah. And what it says is percent change in housing price by state from 1991 to 2017. What percentage growth has there been in our housing costs from 1991 to 2017? And all the way down here, 4th highest in the country, 276% growth in housing prices since 1991. So this problem is an acute one for Utah, a real problem with our population growth. And I'll tell you, it's even more problematic for lower income families. And thankfully, there's been a lot of coverage about this recently. Housing affordability is a real problem. The average resident on the Wasatch Front spends about 59% of their income, household income, on housing and transportation. Recommendation is it should be below 50%. So the average person is overspending. For lower income families, it's as high as 80 or 90%. Does that leave money for the basic necessities of life? I mean, a little fun now and then, savings for college and retirement? No, it doesn't. Housing cost is a huge issue that we need to deal with. What haven't I mentioned yet? What's another key issue for our region? Shout it out. Air quality, okay, there's a bunch, right? Thank you, water, et cetera. Yeah, I'm getting flooded by too many issues. Air quality, of course, is another issue. We see it, we live it. The reality is that our air quality is actually better. We all know this, right? It's better now than it was decades ago. But we also know a lot more about the impacts of bad air on our health, even at relatively low levels, and the impact on business recruiting. I mean, it's a real problem. So this is an issue that, according to studies done by Envision Utah, they do surveys of what are the issues most important to Utahns. Routinely, air quality is in the top 1, 2, or 3 issues in terms of quality of life here on the Wasatch Front. Okay. What do we do about all this stuff? Well, one of the things that's really good is that we have a lot of good, smart people working on these issues. I mentioned the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. I'm going to show you a little video. It's about 5 minutes long. So look at this, and then we'll come back on the other side and talk about that path forward with the Wasatch Choice 2050. Enjoy.
President Theodore Roosevelt once said, We have fallen heirs to the most glorious heritage a people ever received, and each one must do his part if we wish to show that the nation is worthy of its good fortune. Here in Utah, that glorious heritage is on full display. From the Red Rock Cliffs of the south to the snow-capped mountains in the north, our state's natural splendor captivates the imagination of all who lay eyes on it. Of course, it's more than the land that drives Utah's good fortune. The people of this great state are hard at work, building up our communities and creating a prosperous future. The economy is growing, unemployment is low, and a high quality of life brings new people and investment from around the world. As we look ahead, what challenges will our state face? What will it look like in 10 years, 50 years? How do we prepare for the Utah of the future and continue to grow and prosper? One thing is certain: Utah is changing, and the work must begin now to pass this glorious heritage to our posterity. At the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, we prepare economic, demographic, and public policy research that helps Utah prosper. The Gardner Policy Institute in the David Eccles School of Business is responsible for preparing the state's long-term demographic and economic projections. These projections make one thing clear: Utah will remain a place of growth and change for the foreseeable future. In a mere half-century, the state will be home to nearly 6 million people, or the size of the Philadelphia metro area today. The state will add approximately 57,000 new residents each year. That's like adding a city the size of Taylorsville again and again and again for 50 consecutive years.
People here in Utah need to recognize that we're really in a region of growth. 2016, we were the fastest growing state population-wise, and we've had a very rapidly growing economy too. And for the foreseeable future, growth really will remain a major dynamic here.
Approximately 1/3 of Utah's growth will come from new people moving into our state. Many of these people will look different, talk different, and think different. Utah will diversify and change.
The growth that's occurring in Utah is accompanied also by change. So we're not talking about the same old Utah just being supersized. And one of the changes that is occurring is the fact that the youth are much more multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic than the adults. What people need to understand is that this shift, the increasing diversity of our youth, outnumbering the more homogeneous elders, it's ongoing, and it's cumulative, and it's irreversible, and it has very significant impact. It's a new Utah that's emerging.
This is the new Utah. We are becoming more urban, which will impact transportation congestion, air quality, housing affordability, public safety, and other challenges faced by urban societies. Technology up our advancements and help prosper new futures, requiring us to build our knowledge economy through education. Critical lands, such as prime agricultural, recreational, and environmentally sensitive lands, will come under intensifying pressure from population growth and economic development, especially in Utah County. Housing will become more expensive, and Utah taxpayers will be called to invest in new roads and transit, water infrastructure, and educational assets. New diversity in demographics, culture, language, socioeconomics, and generations create the necessity to reinvent and reimagine how we design and connect our communities. It's not our grandmother's Utah anymore. But we live in a prosperous state and a time of abundance. We have wise community leaders and citizens who are capable of guiding the future direction of our state. Our economic, cultural, technological, and demographic capacity has never been greater.
We're living in times of tremendous growth and change. The dynamic for change will only become more intensified as time goes on. What we need to recognize is that our actions today will shape the future that we have tomorrow. The future's not given. we are active participants in, not just witnesses to, the great changes that are going on. And the actions we take today very purposefully will impact the future.
We frequently say past is prologue. I like to look back to 1847, when the Mormon pioneers settled Salt Lake Valley. Parley P. Pratt was in the Advanced Scouting Company, and he wrote this in his journal. We could not refrain from a shout of joy, which almost involuntarily escaped from our lips the moment this grand and lovely scenery was within our view. Looking forward, I feel this same sense of optimism. We live in an extraordinary state, and we absolutely have the power to create the future we want for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren.
The new Utah will require us to guide change if we are to preserve what we value. Community leadership, infrastructure investment, planning, tax modernization, and social cohesion will be more important than ever before. Decision makers have the opportunity and power to guide this growth through thoughtful planning, careful investment, and wise public policies. We will do what is difficult. We will succeed for our posterity. A new day is dawning in Utah.
So I feel a great sense of optimism about the future, but it depends on which path we choose. And there is uncertainty about our future. There is risk in our future based on those challenges that I was outlining before. The good news is that Utah, better than any place I've ever lived or worked before, really knows how to bring people together to collaborate. Some people have called this our secret sauce of collaboration. I have the great privilege of being the director of this organization, Wasatch Front Regional Council, that brings local elected officials together across the region to think about these challenges and set plans so that we continue to have a wonderful quality of life in the future for generations to come. And that brings us to the Wasatch Choice 2050, this vision, this blueprint, if you will, for transportation and land use and housing and economic development for the future. So where does this come from? Well, it's a process that we use over multiple years to develop ultimately the final vision. It starts off with identifying what are our goals for our region. Things like livable and healthy communities, quality transportation choices, clean air, access to opportunities, ample parks and open spaces. And then we look at scenarios. So this is a strategy in planning, which basically says, what if we develop in this way? What if we develop in that way? Different transportation choices, different housing patterns, and what will the impact be against those goals? And then we narrow that down to a preferred scenario. So in the process that we use, that's where we are now, is coming up with that preferred scenario. And then, once we know where we want to go, we then can prioritize the projects, the investments, transportation, housing, etc., in order to get to that preferred scenario or that vision. That's what Wasatch Choice 2050 is in a nutshell. There are 4 key strategies that underlie the Wasatch Choice 2050, that make up Wasatch Choice 2050, and I'm going to go through each of them. Number 1, provide transportation choices, right? Driving, yes. Transit, biking, walking, making sure people have options for how they get around. Let me give you an example of this. This is a chart that shows the total number of hours of delay that people are experiencing on the Wasatch Front. Like, how much time are they waiting because of congestion? And it looks back to 1995 and then comes up to 2015. That green line is the actual. That's what we have actually experienced. And you see that it grows, it almost doubles. The amount of delay in Utah's transportation system has almost doubled over 20 years. But that is after, or it comes with, all the investments we've made in our transportation system, rebuilding I-15, building Mountain View Corridor, creating out of nothing the entire tracks and frontrunner, the UTA rail system, right? All of that is on the green line. If we had not made those investments in transportation over the past 20 years, we would be on this blue line. And the amount of delay in our transportation system today would be 2.5 times where it is today, 2.5 times. So these principles project forward into the future also. We have to keep investing in transportation and providing choices, and that's actually the core of Utah's unified transportation plan, looks ahead to the future and the key investments that are needed. So today, talking about these choices, right now, about 21% of residents on the Wasatch Front have access within a quarter mile to high capacity, frequent, reliable transit service. And about 40% within a quarter mile have access to a safe and dedicated bikeway. As we look ahead to the future in the plan, that'll grow to 37% for transit and 73% for biking, for active transportation. Now, if we do that, remember this delay, the amount of time I told you about before, 1 hour and 41 minutes. Well, if we make these choices available, it'll come back down to about 1 hour 20. Better. Is that acceptable? Still a question whether that's acceptable. And if it's not, then we have to do more. Make even more investments. Make transit free. Take advantage of connected and autonomous and shared vehicles, innovations in technology, etc. So, but if we implement the plan as conceived, that's where we'll be. Strategy number two, housing options. Support housing options. Right now, again, on the Wasatch Front, the mix of our housing that we have is about 75% single family, right? Think traditional standalone home garage, right? And about 25% multifamily, townhome, apartment, condo. 75-25. As we look ahead to the future with all the growth and the limited space, that ratio needs to shift. Not completely reversed, but to be about 60-40. So a 15% growth in the percentage of households or housing units that are multifamily. Now, this is not government dictating to people, this is where you will live or the type of housing you're going to be in. This is responding to the market trends and the demographic trends. And in fact, this is where the development is occurring right now. If you look at the mix of housing units that are being built, we need to stay on that path, provide those housing choices, neighborhood choices. Strategy number three, preserve open spaces. Of course, this is about our iconic mountains and protecting them and the rivers and the lake, but it's also about having green space woven right into the fabric of our communities, parks, trails. And so as we think about the current path we're on, how much space we're going to absorb, how much we're going to expand out, if we develop in the way that the vision contemplates, looking at not just transportation or housing, but where those things are, we'll actually save 27,000 acres of land that otherwise would be consumed by development. It'll be saved and protected. All right, so provide transportation choices, support housing options, preserve open space. Strategy number 4 is where the magic really happens. Strategy number 4, linking development and transportation decisions together. How do we get the maximum value out of all the decisions on any of these things? It's by coordinating them together. If we can provide multifamily housing in proximity to transit, then the folks that are living there are going to be able to access more opportunities for jobs or for school. If businesses can be sited, manufacturing business can be sited closer to a highway interchange, then they're going to have better access, suppliers and customers, and put less impact on the surrounding road system. Coordinating these things. And this matters in terms of new areas that are developed. It also matters in terms of redeveloping existing areas. Think about all the outmoded commercial. How many of you in the past year have bought something online, on the internet, right? Most people. Our economy is shifting, and as the years go by, there will be a lot of places that are currently commercial that can flip. And then how are they going to be used? And think about coordinating that, housing, office space with transportation. So these strategies underlie the Wasatch Choice 2050, and I want to show you what this looks like. This is a screenshot of the interactive map for Wasatch Choice 2050. This is available on WFRC's website, wfrc.org. And see all the colors and all the layers. To make this a little more straightforward, let me do this. I'm going to strip out, well, first I'm going to zoom in on southern Davis County, northern Salt Lake County. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to strip out all of the information, all the layers. So we're now zoomed in, right? Just for orientation purposes, we are here, University of Utah, okay? And what I want to do is I'm going to bring back in each of the layers at a time so you can see how they have an interaction with each other. Centers, right? Where are people going to live? Clustering of housing, okay? Let me show that again. Centers, job areas. See this? Where can people work in the future? And then open space, right? Protecting and preserving that open space. And now let's look at the transportation aspects. Roadway investments, transit investments, enhancements. See it coming on? And then active transportation, biking, bike trails, sidewalks, major active transportation investments also. So if you go on the website, you can see all of these things as they interplay. You can turn layers on and off. You can zoom into any area you want. You can click on specific projects or centers and provide feedback. So all of this data is available, and it's the way we try to think about the region, the interplay of all of these things together. Now, because it's a little hard to tell just from a map like this what we're really talking about. You got to sort of look at what does this really feel like at the local level. Some of you, my friends in the audience, have heard me tell this story before. I would talk about things like this when I first moved here to Utah in 2010. And I had a state legislator, who I will not name right now, come up to me and literally poke me in the chest and say, because they knew I had come here from New York, I grew up in New York, and then I was in Chicago, and then I moved here. And they poked me in the chest and said, don't try to make Utah like New York City or Chicago. And I was like, I moved here because this is where I want to live. I don't want that. This is what I want. But it's a little hard to tell from you just talking about these general principles. So let me show you an image. This is in Layton, okay, up in Davis County. And it's pretty traditional, like, suburban arterial street with strip development. But then imagine it with some more pedestrian amenities, crosswalks, transportation choices. See the front runner line in the back, right? And then imagine it mixed in with other types of development. So retail on the first floor, offices on the second floor. That doesn't look like New York or Chicago, right? It's more of a Utah scale. This can be what we're talking about. There's no one size fits all. Downtown Salt Lake is different than Layton, is different than Provo or Ogden or whatever, but each community has to decide for themselves how this works. Another issue in terms of development of transportation and housing, et cetera, is our street networks and making sure that they are connected. What these images are showing you is these are schools, okay? The school on your left is in Daybreak in West Jordan, and the school on the right is in Sandy, actual schools. And we've mapped out the paths that kids can take to get to school, okay? Where do you think more kids walk to school? Daybreak, obviously, right? There was an analysis that was done. 88% of the kids in Daybreak walk to school, and in schools like this on the right side, it's more like 20%, okay? Design, where key destinations are located, the design of our networks and our streets really makes a difference. And just to make this super clear, here's an even easier way to look at it. On the right side here, let's say little Roger is walking to school, okay? Or little Roger has to get to school is really more the point, and he lives in this community. Well, he'd have to go all the way out on this path here, out to this busy street, and then this major arterial to get to school. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Little Roger's probably going to get driven to school, right? But if you look over here with connected streets, little Roger can walk to school, okay? I'm using Roger because my friend Roger is sitting right here, okay? So that matters to health, right? More walking or biking, less driving, less impacts on our air quality from community design, from street design, all right? So those are those 4 strategies that I talked about that underlie the Wasatch Choice 2050. And in order to do those things, to make those a reality, it is 1,000 or 1,000,000 little decisions and a bunch of really big decisions, okay? So we work on issues up at the Capitol, right? I have some of my friends here that we work closely with on issues at the Capitol to make sure that there's funding available for good investments. But then there's also at the local level, all those design decisions and zoning and land use decisions that translate into all 4 of those strategies. So if we do this, if we implement these strategies and develop in the way that the Wasatch Choice 2050 contemplates, what will it mean? What are the outcomes for our region, right? Well, let me go through a few of them. Access, better access to jobs. If we develop in the way that we're contemplating and that the vision contemplates, we will have access, the average resident will have access to 57% or another 166,000 jobs compared to if we don't implement the vision. Matters for upward mobility, it matters for a thriving economy, right? What I want is for my kids and grandkids to be able to stay here, and if they can't find a good job, they can't access a good job, there's much more likely that they will. Air quality, we talked about it before. This is a chart that is reflecting the modeling, the air quality modeling that our organization does for the Wasatch Front. This reflects the vision in expected, planned development and transportation investments. So right now, 2015, that's what this line shows. That's the 2015 line, okay? You have seen a decline in, these are emissions from mobile sources, vehicles, VOCs and NOx. And you see this incredible decline. And between 2015 and 2050, we are projecting a 59% reduction, not reduction in the rate of growth, a 59% reduction in the actual emissions that are being produced. Why is that happening? Well, the biggest reason is that our cars and vehicles are getting cleaner, Tier 3 vehicles and Tier 3 fuels. But it's also because of all the stuff that I've been talking about providing transportation choices to people so that people can leave the car at home and bike or walk or take transit or take shorter trips if they're going to. And if development is mixed, right, around transportation and jobs, and then people are traveling shorter distances or they don't even have to jump in their car and have a cold start, right? Have you heard of this term, cold start? When you turn your car on, first time of the day, that's a cold start. The majority, more than 50% of your emissions for an entire trip, you could drive for an hour, and the emissions are going to be the same as just when you turn it on. So the strategy has to be try to limit the number of times people are even just starting their car, okay? So if you can set it up that people have the option to not drive, it really impacts air quality. And then also on costs, local infrastructure, which relates to the taxes that you pay. On our current path, local communities, cities, and counties will spend about $26 billion on local infrastructure. Think sewer, local roads, water, electric, etc. All of those things that we pretty much take for granted. But if we develop in the way that I was talking about, a more centered development, less sprawl, we will actually have a lower cost and will save approximately $5.7 billion, 22% savings in tax dollars that we won't essentially be unnecessarily expending on infrastructure to support more sprawl. And finally, improved health. Now, this is a chart that comes from Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the largest healthcare companies in the world. And they think about the efficacy of their healthcare strategies and what makes the biggest difference to health outcomes. You see the smallest gear? That's medical care. 10% of outcomes for health come from the quality of the medical care itself. The biggest is personal behaviors. So, if we do what I've been talking about and we provide people a much more ability to walk or to bike, then that means that they're going to be healthier, right? It's a direct relationship there. And then also this blue gear, environmental and social factors having an impact on health. The Utah Department of Workforce Services has information and tells us that there are 60,000 children in the state of Utah today that live in intergenerational poverty. 60,000 children. So, to me, we have a moral imperative to not leave those children, those families, and those communities behind. But we also have an economic imperative to not leave them behind, because if we can design our communities and our housing and our transportation in ways that they are affordable and that we're providing access to opportunities for those communities, then they're more likely to be productively engaged in the economy, have jobs, be self-sufficient, lower costs on social services. So the design of our communities and all these issues I've been talking about is really relevant not just to our physical health, but to the overall health and prosperity and well-being of the entire region. So I would leave you with the fact that we, all of us, all the people that I work with, all the people that you work with, we have a choice for how our region is going to grow in the years to come. We're growing very fast. It creates a challenge for us. But we have a track record in Utah, that secret sauce I mentioned before, of collaborating together. And if we do this, we are in a position to make positive changes for the future, have a bright future, and that, my friends, is what Wasatch Choice 2050 is all about. That's the end of my remarks, but I would be very happy to take any questions or comments from anybody. Thank you very much. Okay, yes, sir, right up front.
Where will water for 5 or 6 million people come from?
Okay, you could hear that. The question was water. Okay. That is an excellent question, which I did not, you notice, obviously, I did not cover in my presentation. Water is the greatest single limiter on growth. And we have a huge problem. Everybody knows this. Climate change, it's a real thing. For the first time, the Utah legislature this year acknowledged climate change is a real thing. I mean, it's a little silly that, in my personal view, that it would take that long for that acknowledgement to be made, right? But it has been made now. Problem being, of course, that then our snowpack, which our region relies on for water, is diminishing steadily over time. And it's really that snowpack and that snow-fed water that comes into our valleys that allowed this valley to be settled in the first place, that made it a good place to be settled. So water is a finite resource and diminishing over time. So your question, where will the water come from? Well, there's not more water, right? Of course. The issue is how much water do we use? And our development patterns that I've been talking about have a huge impact on water consumption. I have a lot of data on this, which I didn't include in this presentation, but Yet another reason for providing housing choices, more multifamily housing, smaller lot sizes, is the single greatest residential water use is what? Watering our lawns, right? There's some people who feel that we have a God-given right to have a green lawn, right? Well, if we have smaller lots and we have more multifamily housing, the water consumption in that type of housing is dramatically lower than it is in large lot, single-family residential development. So there's a lot more to your question, of course, pipeline building, agriculture, et cetera, but I'm going to leave it there as it relates to this, okay? Okay, yes, Mark.
Andrew, could you please mention some of the tools that WFRC uses to implement this plan along the Wasatch Front?
Okay, so there are microphones which you can use, but I will repeat. Mark said, what are some of the tools that WFRC, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, uses to implement some of these plans along the Wasatch Front? I'll tell you, we technically have tools, as you know. The most powerful tool, I think, that we have to use is talking with people like you, with elected leaders in our community who have the power to make decisions around zoning, taxes, infrastructure investment. And then have community, folks that are engaged in the community, and have that dialogue about what we want for our region, okay? Now, you've probably seen, and some of you have probably participated in, there'll be a development proposal in a community, and have you heard the term NIMBY? Not in my backyard, NIMBYism, right? Well, people will say, well, like, hey, Andrew, I buy what you're saying here, and it's a really good idea over in the next community, not here. Now that is a knee-jerk reaction. It is not always wrong, okay? It is not always wrong. I think it is entirely fair that sometimes there might be a stable single-family neighborhood that it doesn't make sense to throw up mixed-use development there. So you coordinate that mixed-use development with transit stations, et cetera. You're doing some of this in South Salt Lake, a lot of this, right? But if we can provide information to people so that they can see what are the implications of the decisions we make today for the future, I think that's the most important tool. How do we do that? We provide information like this. We also develop this Wasatch Choice 2050 and have that online interactive map, which allows people to go and see where is that development going to occur and then provide feedback on that. We also provide grants directly to communities. We have a program, it's called the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program, that we created specifically to help communities deal with these tricky development issues. What's the vision? How do we get stakeholder input? Do scenarios planning, write ordinances to make these decisions? Because it's one thing to have a vision, and then it's a totally different thing to implement it. So, but it really, the big answer to your question, your softball question, is all of us being engaged and talking with our elected officials and saying, hey, I want these things for my community and for my region in the future, right? If people that say, no change is not a reality, right? It is impossible. Doing nothing will result in significant changes, many of them negative. So if people come out and say, no, I don't want that change, and they're the only people that have loud voices, then it makes it seem their voices are disproportionately impactful. So you have to have engaged community residents like you and community leaders like you who are similarly engaged in those discussions. Okay, next question. Yes, sir.
Thanks so much for this optimistic picture that you gave us. I wish I could share in your optimism. Just let's take a look at where we are now today as a country. We know that climate issues are multifaceted and interconnected, and there we have to see how we spend our money. We spend more money on defense spending than on people and on infrastructure, and it's defense activities, defense-related issues, that causes more climate problems than anything else, and yet our defense budget is combined equal or more than next 8 countries together, and we don't think it's still enough. We have to spend more on it. Now, we live in a way that shows we're in a perpetual state of denial when it comes to climate change. We drive big cars compared to the Europe and Asia. we live in a rather obese lifestyle and not connected with each other, don't have that sense of connection, always that fear of the other, and all that, the income inequality between the rich and the poor. Really great. All these things together have some effect when it comes to healthy lifestyle and climate sustainability, because climate does not respect any boundaries. There are no outsiders.
Right.
And yet we are withdrawing, getting insiders, getting tribal. So there is this definite move toward what I call Talibanization of American mind. What are those facts? The Taliban mindset, God, gun, and the tribe.
Okay.
God and gun, that's a very toxic combination. Allow that with the tribe, and the Republican Party is taking us direction.
Right.
So now we are so proud to live in Utah because in Utah nobody believes in God, nobody believes in gun, and nobody is a member of the Republican Party. So I just rest my case. Thank you.
He rests his case, he says. I'm not sure whether I should give a very detailed response to that or just say, I hear you, I feel what you're saying. To some extent, we have no choice but to keep working at these issues, right? And by doing things like these regional efforts of trying to bring stakeholders together and say, hey, we have a shared place that we love here in Utah, whether you're Republican or Democrat, Mormon, Jewish, non-religious, ski bum, whatever the case may be, right? We all love this place. And so seeking that common thread, and then everybody wants to have a wonderful environment for us to live and thrive in here. I say environment broadly, everybody loves this place. So what we try to do is emphasize those things that we have in common as we work on efforts like this. And there is no one size fits all, and that's okay. You can have different types of development patterns in different parts of the region. I would just also note that there are many things that are negative to focus on. We can also think about the fact that we have seen an unprecedented decline in global poverty and disease. I mean, it's like the greatest story in the history of the world that over the last few decades, the education rates have skyrocketed, disease rates have declined, death rates in children have declined, global poverty rates have declined precipitously. We have incredible technologies coming online for energy production, capturing more solar, alternatives to carbon-based fuels. I mean, there are so many positive things that we can focus on as well. So combat the negative and work on the positive. Thank you. Yes, 1, 2, go ahead.
How much luck have you had engaging young people? Planning for them.
Yeah.
And Utah is famously terrible, for instance.
Yeah.
How do you get them?
Well, you come to the University of Utah and you give discussions, and hopefully some students show up, the ones that are either confident enough about how their prep for finals is going, or this is important enough to take a break even though they're preparing for finals. So thanks, team. So we do outreach. We try, this is it's going to sound like an old guy talking about how to talk to youth. We use social media because the kids today, they're really into social media, right? But we do that, provide alternative paths into information. Little off topic, but how many of you went to the gun march this weekend? Oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was amazing, right? 8,000 people at that march. And who put that together? Who stimulated that? Who were the speakers at that march? Not the politicians, right? It was all high school kids. It was all high school kids. Now, some of you lived through the Vietnam era and saw and participated in, I imagine, protests and engagement, civic engagement. And folks are saying this is the closest analogy to what's happening right now with youth engagement is the Vietnam era, right? Really different situations, but it gives you hope that people are engaged. Will they vote? That's the question. My first job out of college, I worked on a campaign in the Chicago area, in the suburbs of Chicago, which included Northwestern University. And I spent all this time trying to get all these students to register and vote, and they were enthused, and I thought, this is going to be it. They're going to turn out, and we're going to sweep through this election. And the turnout was abysmal. It was so low, and I was crushed. My spirits were crushed. I hope that's not where we are now, okay? I hope what we're seeing right now is a resurgence of engagement, civic engagement, and voting specifically from all demographics. So, okay, yes?
First, a quick comment and then a quick question.
Yeah.
Quick comment piggybacks off yours in that this is a nice little presentation. I have friends here who have to work.
Yeah.
And I can't get a job, so I'm here.
Okay. Thank you.
Have you thought about putting this PowerPoint and even the talk online?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be a great idea.
Yes, and it is online on our website.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. This, you didn't intend this as a derogatory comment, but this nice little presentation is online. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. But it is online. That's why if you go to WFRC.org, all this information is there.
The interactive map, and I'm talking about the actual screen that goes with it.
Yeah. There's a version of this. If you want to, you or others want to watch me yap, again, you've done it twice now. If you want to watch me yap, there's a version of this presentation that shows the slides going also. So it's not quite like Al Gore level, but it's, okay. Question.
Underpinning all this, on the federal government is also corporate industry.
Yeah.
The underpinning is the need for so many people for growth. Everything has, we have to grow this business. We have to grow this population.
Yeah.
Because that grows business. And that can't be done forever. Nobody wants to talk about sustainability. They do.
Yeah.
But a lot of business, no, we need more sales. We need more of this. And it's not about sustainability, and that really underpins a lot of what's going on in this. That's a foundation.
Okay. Yeah. So the point, the very valid point that you're making is there's this. It's all about growth. It's always about growth, growing business, growing population, and not enough focus on sustainability. Now, I don't think you're suggesting that growth is a bad thing, although there are some folks that say, too much growth, we can't handle this. I personally don't feel that way. I think that with the right community design, with the right technology, the right farming strategies, etc., we can grow, and it can be a very healthy and positive thing, particularly having a lot of young people that are educated, multicultural, more diverse population. It's a really positive thing for our community. But to your point, it has to be done in a way that's sustainable. Because if we grow in a way, it's the statistics I was showing, if we grow in a way that is traditional, and it's all large lot, single family homes, it will be unaffordable, we'll use more water, we'll have worse air quality, we'll have worse congestion, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, so for businesses, an expectation, there's been a healthy trend that I've seen over the last few years, I'm sure you've seen this as well, that corporate culture and corporate responsibility, more and more businesses are being asked and are trying to promote themselves as being positive contributors to the community. Not enough, and sometimes I think, well, the marketing budget for a company to talk about the good things they've done is actually more than the budget to actually do those good things, right? You see this sometimes, right? I know, but I will tell you that I think here in Utah, our business community generally is a very positively engaged in our sustainability and the health and prosperity and inclusiveness of our region. The Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce is the leading business organization. You may not love everything about what they do, but I work with them all the time, and I think for the most part, they are partners with us on, for example, promoting transit. The Salt Lake Chamber right now is the leading voice for talking about housing affordability. Now, why is that? Does it mean that transit investment and affordable housing will be good for business or growth over the long term? Yes. Fine, fine. Don't impugn them because they're doing something that is good for community in addition to being good for their bottom line. So what can we do? Call them on it. Ask, patronize businesses that are positive contributors to the community. Ask them about their corporate responsibility. Go to their boards of directors meetings. You can do all of these things. But I think that again, Martin Luther King famously said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but oh my gosh, I swear to God I didn't see that. I did not see that on the wall. Thank you very much. But it bends towards justice, okay? That's really, I swear I didn't see that was there. That's great, that's really great, okay. And that applies in so many different contexts. It might seem a little out of context to say that concept applies to corporate responsibility, but it does. It's asking all of the stakeholders, and maybe I'll conclude with this. Asking our neighbors and our community members, be they businesses, be they elected officials, be they community leaders, residents, whatever, to think about more than just themselves and just their neighborhood, to think about the entire region, the whole scope of the geography of the region and all the people within our region, our diversifying region, and work together and think about the long-term consequences of the decisions we're making today. And if we do that, we're going to bend that arc towards justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Andrew.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us, and join us in the fall, please.
Let me just say that I would love to stay and chat with many of you. I actually have to get to the airport to catch a plane, so I don't mean to be rude, but I'm gonna run out. But if you want to chat more in the future, please feel free to get in touch with me or anybody in my organization. Okay?